London looks permanent. Granite bridges, Gothic towers, wealth solidified into skyline. But beneath its monuments, the city is restless. Streets follow ancient cattle paths. Cathedrals rise where pagan groves once stood. And under the glass of modern towers, the Thames still curls like a spine. Muddy, tidal, patient. Before kings and bankers, there were marshes and mammoths. Before empire, a river bend shaped like a bowl that caught people, then power. London has been built, burned, bombed, and rebuilt more times than its citizens remember. But the ground never forgets. Dig a foundation, find a Roman coin, fix a sewer, uncover plague pits. This is a city of layered dominions: Celts, Romans, Saxons, Normans, parliamentarians, bankers. Each era added its code: language, stone, law, resistance. None ever erased what came before. London absorbs its history, then builds on top. So how did this mist-soaked corner of an island become the nerve centre of an empire, the cradle of revolutions, both financial and political, the birthplace of Shakespeare and punk rock, suffragettes and hedge funds? What makes this patch of earth, fog-bound and flat, so endlessly magnetic, so dangerously influential? To understand London, we have to peel it back, layer by layer, era by era, brick by brick. Origin spark, river, clay, and a hill of bones. Before London was a city, it was a river curve in a wet valley, lined with reed marshes and slow-moving tide. The Thames, shallow enough to ford at low tide, wide enough to carry boats inland, was more than a waterway. It was a magnet, drawing wildlife, travellers, settlers, and eventually, empires. Go back far enough, and this land was tropical. 65 million years ago, dinosaurs paced through fern forests here. 2 million years ago, glaciers carved the landscape, flattening the terrain, pushing flint and gravel south. When the ice retreated, the Thames shifted, southward, carving out its modern course, its banks fertile with silt and clay. By 4000 BCE, Neolithic communities were fishing, farming, and burying their dead along the river. Bronze Age people left tools, burial mounds, and timber causeways submerged in the Thames, some still dredged up during dredging or dock expansion. By the Iron Age, Celtic tribes like the Trinovantes and Catuvelauni ruled the region, trading across the channel, their settlements scattered, defensible and sacred. One hill in particular, now Ludgate Hill, held ceremonial weight. They built with timber, they buried with care, but they left no walls, no stone, no grid. Then came 47 CE, and the Romans arrived, imperial, methodical, brutal. They built a bridge, then a road, then a fort, then Londinium. The Romans didn't ask permission. They surveyed, paved, and named. Londinium became a walled settlement, a trading hub, and administrative post. Within decades, it had bathhouses, temples, and villas heated by underfloor hippocausts. Grain and glass flowed in from Gaul. Tin, wool, and slaves flowed out. But the conquest never held peacefully. In 60 CE, Queen Boudica of the Iceni razed Londinium to the ground. The Romans rebuilt, bigger, stronger, prouder. By the 3rd century, it was a regional capital. By the 4th, it was fading. Rome withdrew. Saxons came. The city fell into quiet ruin. Ivy crawled over stones. Fires went out. Roads disappeared under dirt and legend. But the river stayed. And somewhere in the silence, the future capital of an empire slept beneath the soil, waiting to be summoned again, by war, by trade, by need. Founding pulse, fire, faith, and the birth of a capital. When Rome abandoned Britain in the early 5th century, Londinium emptied. The Saxons, who trickled in from across the North Sea, avoided the old Roman ruins, believing them cursed or haunted. Instead, they settled upstream, establishing Lundenwic, a trading village west of the abandoned city walls, near today's Covent Garden. It was modest, timber halls, open markets, a wooden dock. But the river still carried goods. Fish, salt, wool, and slaves moved in and out. Vikings raided it in waves, fires swept through. But the settlement persisted, growing with the rhythm of tide and trade. Then in 886 CE, the tide shifted. Alfred the Great, King of Wessex, repelled the Danes and reoccupied the Roman city ruins, fortifying them as a bulwark against further attacks. Londonburg was reborn, stone walls repaired, streets redrawn, a new identity rising from Roman bones. By the 11th century, London had become a power node, not yet England's capital, but its richest city. Churches multiplied, monasteries hummed, a wooden bridge stretched across the Thames, and perched on a low hill above it all, a new symbol of conquest began to rise. The Tower of London. After 1066, when William the Conqueror took England by force, he made his presence known in stone. The Normans redrew London's power grid, building castles, imposing French language and law, and tightening the knot between church and crown. But even as kings reigned, London's heartbeat was commerce. By the 12th century, the Guildhall oversaw the city's mercantile class. Charters guaranteed self-governance. River trade surged: wool, cloth, spices, furs. Ships moored along Queenhithe and Billingsgate. Markets teemed. Taverns echoed. Faith shaped the skyline. In 604 CE, St. Paul's Cathedral had been founded. By the medieval period, its Gothic successor stood proudly, dominating both skyline and scripture. The city was a labyrinth of churches, over 100 by the 14th century, each with bells tolling time, sin, and civic life. And yet life here was never safe. Fires consumed whole quarters. Plague arrived in 1348, carried by ships from Europe. Within months, half the population was dead, bodies stacked in plague pits. Monks wrote their own death records mid-paragraph. But London endured, always. By the 15th century, kings still crowned in Westminster. Parliaments met sporadically. But it was London's merchants and guilds who now held the keys to England's wealth. It wasn't yet an empire, but it was ready for one. Golden Ark, Empire's engine, Shakespeare's stage. By the 16th century, London was no longer just England's largest city, it was its nervous system, pulsing with politics, money, ambition, and belief. The medieval maze of alleys and parishes swelled. Over 200,000 people packed its walls. The city reeked of river rot, horse dung, and spoiled food. But it spoke with new confidence. The printing press, brought to England in 1476, had found fertile ground in London. Words flooded the streets, sermons, pamphlets, plays. The Bible was translated into English, and with it came rebellion. Under Henry VIII, London became a stage for religious whiplash. Monasteries were dissolved, saints stripped from walls, gold stolen, land seized, Catholic to Protestant, back again, then back for good, at sword point. But even amidst this chaos, London became a crucible of culture. Shakespeare wrote for its theatres. So did Marlowe, Johnson, Webster. The Globe stood on the Thames's southern bank, outside the city walls, an arena for blood, laughter, and poetry. Plague closed the theatres as often as critics did. But the art endured. Meanwhile, commerce exploded. The founding of the Royal Exchange, 1571, and Bank of England, 1694, transformed London into the financial core of Europe. Joint stock companies emerged, tools for exploration and exploitation. The East India Company launched from these same counting houses, backed by London merchants and sanctioned by the Crown. Cotton, sugar, tea, tobacco, and people. The wealth of colonies flowed in. The scars of slavery and extraction never left. By the 17th century, London was bursting at its seams, and then it burned. In 1666, the Great Fire of London devoured the city's timber heart. Over 13,000 homes and 87 churches turned to ash in 4 days. But from the ashes, a new vision emerged. Christopher Wren rebuilt St. Paul's Cathedral in stone and grandeur. Streets were widened, fire codes were born. London rose cleaner, stronger, yet still dangerous. By the 18th century, it was the beating heart of a global empire, a city of contrast. Enlightenment salons and debtors' prisons, gin lanes and royal courts. The Thames choked with ships, its banks lined with warehouses and wharves. Then came the Industrial Revolution, and London transformed again, from imperial capital to industrial behemoth. Railways pierced its outskirts, factories rose, the West End glittered, the East End suffocated, sewers overflowed, smog blackened sky and lung. Still, innovation pulsed. Engineers like Joseph Basil Gett built vast sewer systems. Charles Dickens turned squalor into literature. Victoria Station, Tower Bridge, the Underground. London didn't just grow, it engineered modern urban life. By the 19th century, London was the largest city on earth, the seat of a sun-never-setting empire. It exported law, railways, literature, and repression. It banked on coal and cotton. It sold civilization and violence in equal measure. It was glorious. It was grotesque. It was modernity in motion. And somewhere in the fog, a reckoning began to gather. Crumble and clash, Blitz, blood, and the fraying of empire. At the dawn of the 20th century, London was untouchable. The British Empire ruled over a quarter of the globe, and London sat at its apex, capital of power, finance, and imperial certainty. But the cracks had already begun to spread. In 1914, war arrived not by invasion, but by train timetable and treaty. World War I swept through Europe, and though London wasn't a battlefield, it became a city under siege. Zeppelins bombed the East End. Ration lines lengthened, suns vanished, and when the soldiers returned, they found a city changed, poorer, angrier, fractured. Then came 1918, and with it, Spanish flu. More than 15,000 Londoners died in silence, suffocating behind closed doors. No parades, no victory, just grief. The interwar years brought unrest. Strikes rolled through the city. The general strike of 1926 shut London down. In the alleyways and pubs, fascists clashed with communists. A decade later, those same streets would burn again. 1939, World War II. London became a target. Between 1940 and 1941, the Blitz rained fire. Over 40,000 Londoners were killed as Luftwaffe bombs flattened homes, schools, cathedrals. St. Paul stood defiantly amid the rubble, a ghost in the smoke. Entire families lived underground in tube stations. Children were evacuated to the countryside. Still, the city didn't break. It absorbed the destruction, rebuilt between air raids, sang in defiance. Keep calm and carry on wasn't branding, it was survival. But victory brought no return to glory. The empire that once fed London now demanded independence. India, Palestine, Ghana, Jamaica, the colonies fell away. Ships came to London's docks no longer carrying goods, but people. The Windrush generation, arriving from the Caribbean in 1948, began the transformation of London into a multiracial metropolis and sparked both cultural renewal and racial backlash. In the 1950s and 60s, London's housing projects rose where bombs had fallen. Immigration grew, so did inequality. Notting Hill, now gentrified, was then the site of race riots and protest. Yet from this friction came new forms: reggae, punk, grime, spoken word rebellion. London became a melting engine, not just a melting pot. But the 20th century had more tremors to deliver. In the 1980s, economic policy turned sharply. Under Margaret Thatcher, industry shrank. Finance boomed. The City of London, that ancient Roman square mile, was reborn as a global banking titan. Skyscrapers rose. Docklands turned from derelict to deluxe. Yet for every tower of glass, a shadow remained. Riots in Brixton, poll tax protests, IRA bombings. By the 1990s, London was no longer the centre of empire, but it was still a global mirror, reflecting all the shocks of a changing world. Deindustrialisation, immigration, terrorism, and the relentless march of capital. London had survived fire, plague, war, and collapse. But what was it now? A ghost of empire? A beacon of modernity? Or something that had never quite chosen what it wanted to become? Reinvention, cool Britannia, credit, and the global metropolis. By the 1990s, the soot of war had long since settled, but London was still rebuilding, not in bricks but in identity. Empire was over, the Cold War was over. What remained was a question. What does the city stand for now? The answer came in fragments. Music, money, multiculturalism. Under Tony Blair, the image of cool Britannia swept in, a marketing campaign disguised as a cultural revolution. Britpop played on the radio. Damien Hirst floated dead sharks in tanks. The Millennium Dome rose along the Thames like a question mark in white fabric. The London Eye turned slowly above the city that now branded itself as a global capital of art, tech and tolerance. Meanwhile, the city's financial core metastasized. Deregulation turned the City of London into a playground for hedge funds and international banks. Russian oligarchs and Gulf royals snapped up mansions in Mayfair and Knightsbridge. Luxury towers rose while council housing crumbled. The skyline spiked with cranes. The July 7th bombings in 2005 reminded the world and Londoners that the city was not invincible. 4 coordinated explosions on the transport network killed 52 people. It was London's worst terror attack since the Blitz, carried out not by foreign agents but British citizens. Grief turned to resolve, then into surveillance, then into normality. Still, the reinvention pressed forward. The 2012 Olympics gave London a global stage, and it dazzled. A working-class neighbourhood in Stratford became a symbol of transformation. Stadiums, rail links, a reborn East End. Danny Boyle's opening ceremony told a national story of punk, protest, empire and NHS nurses dancing under glowing clouds. It worked. For a moment, London felt cohesive, but underneath the flag waving was a familiar pressure. Cost, class, control. Housing prices skyrocketed. Whole boroughs gentrified. Artists fled to the margins. Immigrants kept the city running. Nurses, cab drivers, teachers, but often couldn't afford to live where they worked. In 2016, the rupture came. Brexit passed. The UK voted to leave the European Union. London voted overwhelmingly to remain. But it no longer decided the national story. The cosmopolitan capital and the rest of the country were no longer in sync. What London exported, inclusion, multiculturalism, financial fluidity, was now under scrutiny. The city had become, once again, an island within an island. And yet, despite the fractures, London remained magnetic. From Brixton sound systems to Shoreditch startups, from food markets run by migrants to mosques built inside old cinemas, the city pulsed with reinvention. It didn't need a master plan. It never had one. Because London's strength wasn't in utopia. It was in the churn, in the way it takes trauma, wealth, chaos and contradiction and builds another layer on top. Modern Mosaic, city of cameras, cranes and contradictions. Today's London is a city of hypermodernity and haunted ground. You can ride a driverless train beneath a Roman wall, tap your card at a tube station older than most countries, pass a billionaire's bunker and a food bank within 5 minutes walk. It is dazzling, it is dysfunctional, and it is still London. With nearly 9 million people, it's Europe's largest city, and arguably its most surveilled, with more CCTV cameras per capita than any urban centre outside China. It's also the most linguistically diverse city in the world. Over 300 languages spoken daily. From Somali to Polish, Urdu to Yoruba, the city is a living atlas, written not in textbooks, but in the rhythms of markets, mosques and music. Yet for all its global sheen, London is cracked beneath the glass. The housing crisis is chronic. Home ownership is out of reach for most under 40. Grenfell Tower, its burned husk still a wound on the skyline, exposed not just negligence, but a brutal divide between rich and poor, marble and cladding, policy and people. Climate looms too. The Thames Barrier, built to defend the city from rising tides, was once used once or twice a year. Now it's closing 6 or 7 times annually. Flash floods surge through Victorian sewers. Heat waves turn brick flats into ovens. London's vastness is now a vulnerability. Still, the city pulses. New tech startups cluster in King's Cross. In the bones of old train yards, food scenes explode in Peckham, Hackney, Dalston. The South Bank hums with theatre, protests, skateboards, and sermons. The Elizabeth line opened in 2022, stitches together suburbs and centre in sleek, quiet motion. Yet every tube ride costs more than some Londoners can spare. The tension is constant, between preservation and progress, between the Crown and the Common, between the museum piece and the megacity. London is both national capital and national scapegoat, a place blamed for what it represents: globalisation, immigration, inequality, power. It is no longer the capital of an empire, but it is still a mirror of Britain, of late capitalism, of urban life stretched to its limit. And in its sprawl, its towers, its protests and pageantry, London asks the question it never quite answers. Can a city that belongs to everyone still be governed by anyone? The future here doesn't feel linear. It feels layered, like everything else in London. Old bones, new builds, quiet pressure, waiting for the next crack, or the next beginning. Future Faultlines, the weight of what still stands. London doesn't age, it accrues. And now, with nearly 2,000 years of layers beneath its feet, the city faces a future that can't be paved over. Climate change is no longer a warning, it's a redesign mandate. Rising tides threaten riverside boroughs. Concrete traps heat in summers that now regularly break records. The Thames, once London's lifeblood, is now its frontline defence. The Thames barrier, built in the 1980s, may soon be obsolete. Newer, higher, smarter defences are already in planning. Technologically, London is shifting fast. AI, automation, and remote work are reconfiguring the skyline's purpose. Skyscrapers filled with empty offices raise new questions about who the city is really for. Post-Brexit, foreign investment slows, visas tighten, and London's historic role as a global gateway is being tested. Will it remain a bridge or become a border? Politically, the city is out of step with much of the nation. It leans younger, more diverse, more international. But national policies often bend toward older, more rural voices. The result? A capital city politically orphaned, yet still tasked with representing the kingdom it no longer quite reflects. And then there's housing. London's most urgent crisis may not be climate or commerce. It may be the simple question: who can afford to live here? The city that once welcomed exiles, labourers, artists, refugees, students, is quietly pricing them out. Its soul risks becoming museumed, curated for visitors, uninhabitable for locals. Yet London has never been a finished project. It is a city built on rebuilding. After fire, after plague, after bombings, after austerity. Its resilience is not sentimental, it's structural. Look ahead and you'll find both fractures and blueprints. Vertical forests in high-rises, community-led housing co-ops, rewilded parks over old rail lines. The fight for the future is happening block by block, borough by borough. The next London may not look like a monument, it may look like a compromise, or a reckoning.